Hi, my name's Dr. Esther Cole. I'm the founder and director of a multi-award winning international team, Lifespan Psychology, the Diverse Practice. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist, life coach and therapy business coach, and the first Black clinical psychologist to receive the BPS Early Career Award. I run individual and group coaching sessions for therapy bosses aspiring to build their team. BOSS stands for Business Owner Support Squad. Welcome to the Breaking Through Therapy podcast. This is the only podcast that supports you to come on the show with your therapist at least 1 year later to talk about the breakthroughs that you've made along your journey and its impact on your life ever since. So this is the Mental Wellness Podcast for people interested in having talking therapy, professionals who deliver talking therapy, and everyone in between. Okay, great. So I'm really excited today to be joined by Joanna Oates, UKCP Chartered Psychotherapist, and Claire, who is going to share an incredible journey with us today. And we're going to learn so much. There isn't very much, I don't think, in the way of support for people who have undergone bariatric surgery. And from what you've told me, Claire, you weighed 30 stones at one point and you've had this incredible improvement in your weight loss and kind of around about half that now?
Less than half.
Less than half, that's incredible. So I know that you've been so generous with us in sharing what you feel that the reasons for that weight gain was and the comfort eating, the binge eating. And you've mentioned kind of horrific violent sexual assault at a young age, 18, domestic violence and so on. And I think this will be really helpful to explore in a bit more detail how kind of eating relates to that and kind of the traps that we fall in terms of trauma when we go through traumatic experiences, how we cope with those experiences and how, you can have a really healing journey through therapy. And really nice to hear that we're going to go into a bit more detail, but that you found a career. There's a lot of kind of resilience that you found through your journey. You found a brilliant career in kind of specialised dietary eating. So I'm going to leave it to you. Just going to have a general discussion just to find out a bit about your journey, how it started. How did you meet Jo?
Sure. Well, actually, it goes back to COVID times. Like many people, I was at home with a bit more time on my hands than I would normally, and maybe quite reflective. And I'd struggled with my weight, since I was a teenager. At that point, I was in my early 40s. And although I had had bariatric surgery in my 30s and I'd lost quite a lot of weight from that, I knew that my eating patterns still weren't right. I was still eating based very much on emotional triggers, if I felt low, anything like that. And I was making bad choices. So I could see that whilst on the outside I looked quite a bit better, actually what was going on in my head really hadn't changed. And I thought, I've got the time here, the opportunity, and I can use this to really push forward and try and get my head into the sort of shape that I wanted it to be, whilst everything was peaceful around me. I think having done some work with therapists in the past, it's incredibly transformational, but it can be quite disruptive. So the idea of doing that at a time when the world was quieter.
What a brilliant idea to make use of that time in lockdown. And how did you find Jo?
I have a cousin who works in nutritional therapy and told me about a website that had therapists on it who specialise in eating disorders. So I took a look and read through the profiles of the different people on there. And Joanna's really stood out to me, actually, partly because she has a specialism and understanding in bariatric surgery, which is unusual. So much experience and knowledge from a nutritional point of view. I've had instances in the past where, because I had bariatric surgery, which had some quite bad complications afterwards, I eat quite a limited diet. And working with people, there's been a sense that perhaps I am choosing to eat a limited diet, and that is an aspect of ordered eating, rather than actually genuinely being restricted in some of the food choices that I make. And Joanna's profile just made it clear that this was someone with the skills who would be able to take that on board and really work with me practically to optimize my eating, and then emotionally with a deep understanding of the journey I've been through.
Fantastic. And Jo, I'd love to hear a bit more about your training, because it's very specialised and you've got the best name ever for a psychotherapist, nutritional therapist, Joanna Oates. So it's the British Association of Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine. Is that who you're affiliated with alongside
Yeah.
the UKCP, which is the Council for Chartered Psychotherapists. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your training? I think that'd be really helpful for people to understand.
Well, I've had a very long training journey. So I trained in nutritional therapy. I qualified way back in 2006 as a nutritional therapist. And then a bit later on, about 2012, a close family member developed an eating disorder. And other nutritional therapists were referring clients to me. And I thought, well, I need some training in this. I can't just go on the back of what I know. So I did some training with the National Centre for Eating Disorders. And then I went on to train to become a psychotherapist and to do some more training with a company called NEDDE, NEDDE. And they did some training, some really useful training on bariatric surgery and how to support people through the process before, during, and after. So that combined with my nutritional therapy training, I had a really good understanding of how to help people with bariatric surgery, how to help them on many levels, on the nutritional front, as well as with the understanding the underlying issues with emotional eating. Because many people go into bariatric surgery and, they really want to lose the weight, which is totally understandable, to help with health problems. But what they don't understand is that the same issues are going to come up. And it's not their fault. Society judges people very harshly, but it is not the client's fault. And, having some understanding of both areas can really help people to move forward.
Yeah, it's been stuck in the trauma and then the coping behaviours, the issues underlying are still there.
Exactly.
And I think what really, really, really stood out to me as a real shock to hear your story, Claire, was around if you hadn't had the surgery, you were given 10 years to live. And absolutely horrific to be given that news.
But I also appreciate the honesty. I think it must be very hard to be the person breaking that news too. But that was the point where I realised that it had gone far, far too far and I had to do something.
So how did you embrace working together? Because you clearly worked really well. So let's bring the two of you together a bit more and just hear about how you communicated.
It was definitely video call time because no one could go face to face. Joe just built a really rapid rapport with me, actually. We got on well right from the start, I think.
I'm not surprised. Me too.
I would agree with you, Claire. And I really felt that, Claire, that we have a saying in psychotherapy, the right tap at the right time. Well, that comes from one of my trainings. And I felt that you were really ready to work, and that helped a lot.
Fantastic. So now I know it's hard to simplify in this way, but if you could say what 3 major breakthroughs were in your therapy of Joe in COVID, is this around 3 years ago?
I guess so, 3-4 years. I forget which bit of COVID it was. But yeah, in terms of breakthroughs, I think one of the first tasks that Joe asked me to do was to keep a food and mood diary. And I think that was very helpful because you could see such a link on black and white in front of myself between feeling low and making food choices that actually weren't in the interests of my body. And also that Joe was able to look at that from a nutritionist point of view and suggest ways to tweak it. From a just general overview, you could improve your diet in this way as well. But I think really for me, just seeing such a clear link, it sort of confirmed my gut feel that I was on the right path, that actually my eating really was related to mood and being in situations that made me feel uncomfortable. And therefore, there was something that we could do together to help me manage that better. So that was definitely one of the big breakthrough moments for me. I think also, I'm not quite sure how Joe kind of enabled me to see it in this way, but previously I think I'd found fault with myself. I think I'd thought that there was something lacking in me, a lack of willpower, a lack of ability, something like not being able to follow through, and actually really understanding that what I had done was just continue a pattern that in the short term, in the immediate aftermath of trauma, that had got me through it, and that actually it really wasn't my fault that a better way hadn't come along, but that she could now help me find a better way. So that was key. And I think the biggest moment for me by a long way, and the one that was very profound, was a task we did a few weeks in, which was to create a timeline of my life. So to draw a graph out on a big bit of paper, and I used a roll of paper because there was a lot, and to map my age in years and then also my weight on different axes, and to record incidents that had happened in my past that were significant, and also to try and map my weight over time. And it was a really challenging thing to do. It made me realise that there were a lot of occasions where life had really thrown me tough times. And probably throughout, 3 or 4 different decades of my life, there were significant instances. But in every time, you could see the direct correlation between that and my weight. And that made me really feel for the first time that actually, if I'm able to find a better way to manage any challenges that life might throw me in the future, this will be something that continues to happen. So I remember showing it to Jo and saying what an impact it had had on me, and her saying to me, "What are you going to do with it?" And I said, to be honest, it makes me very sad. And I took it outside and burnt it in the garden, slightly like a mad woman to anyone. But I felt the most amazing sense of relief. There was something about burning it that made the sort of emotional weight feel like it was coming off my shoulders at the same time. And I would definitely say from that point forward, I have felt different.
Okay, let's take a pause there. Come and have a free 15-minute consultation with one of our incredible multi-award-winning practitioners at Lifespan Psychology, the Diverse Practice. We're a multicultural team of doctorate-trained psychologists, psychotherapists and counsellors offering assessment, evidence-based talking therapy, coaching, training and consultations. We now also offer ADHD assessments in person and online. We work with a range of corporate, commercial and holistic companies and accept private medical insurance, referrals from the NHS, social care and rehabilitation companies. We also offer a range of fees for self-funding clients. Contact us at info@lifespanpsychology.co.uk or www.lifespan-psychology.com and follow us on our various social media channels in the show notes. Our clients at Lifespan Psychology are our true award winners. We're here because of you, we're an award-winning team because of you, and we're inspired to be the best that we can because of you. And that is incredible, isn't it? Because I think what's really powerful about the timeline is that we're not defined by our histories and our past. And a lot of the time we don't have control over, like you say, the challenges that life throws at us, or how we've developed ways to cope that maybe are harmful or aren't ideal, but they've got us through those really difficult situations. I think that's incredible. You're not defined by your past, and burning it, catharsis, sounds absolutely brilliant. Jo, they sound like fantastic techniques. And what I really liked was the kind of the science behind it, like the science that was backing up the correlations in that graph and what patterns you were able to see. Do you want to talk to us a bit more about that, or any other kind of thoughts you might have had about Claire's breakthroughs?
Well, the assessment, the lifeline, is a tool that I use. I try to use it face-to-face with clients now that we're out of COVID times. And I always find that clients get profound insights into their lives using this tool. And it can be quite upsetting and very demanding for both the therapist and the client. But it's so useful. It's really useful. And what I usually do is I reflect on it after the session and make some notes, and I might look back at it. And I have used it with clients over more than one session. I've had clients who, we've gone back and we've looked at different areas, and I found it's really useful. And it does help clients develop self-compassion. And this is so important because I think a lot of people come to me and think, oh, she's a nutritionist. She'll put me on the right diet. And that's not what it's about. It really is about understanding what underpins eating behaviours and gaining self-compassion. Often we need to make friends with a wounded child from the past who's undergone some terrible things and learn how to comfort that child and learn how to set boundaries in our own lives. And for me, with Claire, I think the breakthroughs were when Claire started to realise, right, that's just not something that's good for me. And I think it's really interesting, Claire, because you're saying that about the food. I realised that I was eating food that just wasn't helpful. But you're also a person, you're a real doer, and you were putting yourself last. You were putting your family first. And I think the breakthroughs came for me when you started to realise that actually you needed some space, and some family situations, particularly with your first family, were not healthy, and you put some boundaries in there. And that was so gratifying to see you take control of those issues. And that enabled you to let go of the food and the eating issues.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And I also think it's something I've taken forward after the time we were working together. I've got a much better sense of not only being kinder and more compassionate to myself, but understanding that I need to be as equal as everyone else in a share of my energy. And I've made myself much more of a priority in my life. And I'm a much happier and I suspect much nicer person to live with as a result as well. So I think it has benefited everybody.
That's great. I'm so pleased to hear this. And a lot of my clients do say this. I've had thank you letters from clients' families as well, which is quite interesting. So, yes, I think it's a win-win, isn't it? It helps spread happiness in the world.
And I think it is really difficult, isn't it, to prioritise yourself, especially if there are any feelings of low self-esteem or low self-worth. And like you say, society is cruel and not kind when it comes to body image. It's a massive issue for many, many people. And so that part of you that was neglecting yourself, I suppose, to put the other people first, it's completely understandable how we would fall into that kind of cycle. But putting the boundaries in, it's difficult, isn't it? How did you find a way to do that? I think because sometimes it feels easier said than done, doesn't it?
It is very difficult. And I think it's the point where, for me, it became obvious that changes to me were going to ripple out to my immediate family and then to my wider family. When you start having conversations with people, for example, saying, I'm not going to accept X invitation because this has a negative association with me, it's something that I will find traumatic, I'm not going to do it. And then explain why, because initially I got pushback from my family, who, you're just being difficult not coming to a big family gathering. And then I said, okay, this is why. This relates to this childhood trauma, this abuse, and I'm just not prepared to put myself through it. It will take too much out of me for me to go. Then that was really challenging. So some family members were really quite shocked that things had been going on under their noses and they weren't aware of it. Other people minimized it and said, gosh, you do make a fuss over nothing. So again, for me, that's quite challenging to hear. But in a way, it's that point where you understand that the only bit you can really control is your response to something. You know, you may hold out a thought that actually one day everyone will play nicely. Probably they won't. You know, some people are very entrenched in their view of the world. So, yeah, there's definitely a ripple where it goes wider. And you can see that it can be quite upsetting to other people. And that was never my intent. But there wasn't a way to protect my boundaries and to do what's healthy for me without saying there are really limits to behaviours that I can tolerate.
Absolutely. And I think that's where therapy can be a lifeline, because you have that one person who can kind of unconditionally listen and have your best interests at heart and really help you navigate and understand what those relationships look like from an outsider's perspective, because it is really hard when we're very close to people, particularly, you know, you've mentioned your parents and other close relatives. So I think that is a lifeline. You get that validation, don't you, that then gives you that kind of courage and assertiveness to show up differently in your life. And it really sounds like that was amazing support, Jo.
I'm also very lucky. I have a fantastic husband as well, who has sort of trod a very careful line as well between occasionally sort of taking me to one side and saying, I observe this behaviour in your family. Is this really healthy? Is it one-sided? Is it this? Is it that? Without judging, but just saying there's a thing here. And actually, sometimes it almost needs to be pointed out. And I suspect that's a difficult line for him to tread, but he's done it with real care and real love.
I was going to say as well, it's so lovely to hear that you've got a supportive husband He sounds wonderful. And I think it's difficult, isn't it, as children? We experience certain things that we then normalise that maybe aren't necessarily healthy. And so when we have a partner or get married or so on, our partners can look in on that and say, well, actually, those dynamics, not the best, not healthy. I saw the impact on you. And it sounded like he was really doing that for you. But part of your story as well was that the weight was almost like used as like a layer of protection against men or against being attractive. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So when I was 18, I was violently sexually assaulted at knife point in a country abroad. And like many people who are subject to sexual attacks, I felt an immediate, very deep sense of shame. And I didn't want to tell anyone. I just found the whole thing completely overwhelming. I didn't go to the police. And as a result, I didn't interact with any services that perhaps could have helped me. So I carried on outwardly looking like all was fine, but actually all was far from fine. And my weight had been creeping up for years since I was a teenager, spiraled out of control. I put on stones in a year for a few years. And I really didn't realise at the time, or even until I worked with Joe, that actually it was sort of a subconscious response in my body. And what I had really been thinking was, if I am much larger, I will not be attractive, and therefore nobody will attack me and do that to me again. The weight sort of served a purpose, and I think recognising that it served a purpose, but actually then understanding that the threat is over, the situation is in the past, and I don't need that weight anymore, was quite key.
That's amazing, and I think that's going to help so many people understand the link, because many people don't talk about sexual assault. It's very, very common because of that shame. And the shame is all the perpetrator, but yet, the victim of sexual assault often feels the shame and doesn't get the support and the help, as you've mentioned. So, Joe, it'd be really helpful to hear a bit more about that. Have you seen a link with disordered eating and sexual assault? And what kind of work, what do you offer to people who've experienced this?
Well, there's often a link between past traumas and shame about past traumas, such as abuse, any kind of emotional abuse or sexual abuse. And that can be, quite deep rooted. So again, it would be about learning to manage the anxieties, the everyday anxieties that come up as a result of that, learning breathing techniques and how to get to a safe place. And I think we did a lot of that. But also, work on recognizing the needs of the person that you were at that particular point in time and sort of replaying that incident if that feels comfortable for you, but seeing it in a different way so that you are actually getting your needs met. So I use somatic therapy and NLP with my clients, which I find very helpful. And parts work, working with different parts and helping people recognize that they've got different parts that need different things, maybe at different times, and that how to recognize that that part's calling to you at that particular point in time. And I was just looking at your food diaries, Claire, and there was one day when you'd noted that you were feeling really sad and lonely, even though you had people around you. And you'd noted that this was the way that your younger self had felt. And it seemed like a real release in that moment that you'd recognise that, and that food wasn't what you needed at that point in time, but you needed a hug. That was a turning point for me when you recognised that. So, yeah, that would be the way I would work with somebody like that.
That's really helpful. And just because ultimately on this show, we want people to come away with self-help techniques. So even if they don't feel comfortable or ready for therapy, they can listen to the show and pinpoint some self-help strategies. So we're going to try and break down things a little bit. Can you tell us what NLP stands for? I think I know, and I was about to say it. But if you could say, and then also what I would love to hear, because I think what the listeners want to hear is how the client experiences the therapy, the actual techniques and the theory that we're applying to situations and the research that we're applying. So, Claire, if you could tell us what NLP meant for you, and Joe, if you could just say, first of all, what NLP means.
Well, it's neuro-linguistic programming. And basically, for me, what it means is I'm helping the clients use their senses, and we all have different dominant senses, to really make a connection. Some people can do this more easily. Some people aren't able to do this, and that's fine. Make connections between their emotions and what they're experiencing in their bodies. So quite often people who have issues with food experience a trigger within themselves, which then, triggers them to eat emotionally, or sometimes even unconsciously. They might not even be aware that they're eating. They might disassociate while they're eating. And it's about really helping them reconnect. And also what I find really useful is using sort of visualization exercises to bring about positive change. So, for example, using a safe place exercise where you associate into a safe place and you can feel all the sensations from the safe place. And then you can use that in your everyday life so that you feel safe, you feel grounded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Claire how that was experienced. So for people listening, what did that mean in your daily life?
I think it's a couple of things. I think the first I would describe is it's like a shift in consciousness. Stuff that was going on maybe at a deeper level without me thinking about it sort of popped into my head. So I might be just about to eat something and I'd sort of stop and have a moment and think, I'm actually hungry. Do I want this? And actually, is this a genuine desire for food? Is this a desire for comfort that I'm trying to make happen through food? So there's just a moment where I'd stop and think. I definitely agree with Joanna's point in terms of food eating sometimes can be disassociative. So I would eat without thinking about it all the time, actually. So actually having that consciousness to stop there was something. I'd also find that there would be words and phrases that Joanna had used and I would recognise it when they popped into my head because they were very much her language. I can't think of any examples now, but it was the sort of thing and I'd think, right, oh, okay, yes. But it wouldn't feel uncomfortable, but it would feel like a little bit of my brain had just been rewired in a good way. But because I was used to it yet, it didn't feel like me just yet. But I'd think, oh, yes, I'll just listen to that. Oh, okay, we'll stop and take a breath. And I think one of the other things, actually, that I probably didn't expect but was lovely is that I actually found that there were plenty of times when I'd be sitting there thinking maybe I quite fancy a biscuit or some chocolate or something that actually isn't going to get an immediate thumbs up, on the nutrition front. And I'd think, actually, I'm not eating this necessarily for emotional reasons. I really fancy that biscuit and I'm going to enjoy every bit of it. And I allowed myself to eat things that don't have a nutritional benefit for the sheer damn pleasure of it and to eat them guilt-free. And then to enjoy that in that moment. And I think I'd spent a lot of years binge eating in secret, eating in private with a lot of shame, a lot of guilt attached to it, a lot of internal finger wagging. And actually kind of just having it all raised at a conscious level, sometimes you just want to eat something lovely for the pleasure of it. And I've rediscovered that joy. And that's been a great thing as well.
Okay, that's food for thought. Let's take a break here. The National Health Service had its 76th birthday this year. I personally believe that health is the most important form of wealth and it should be free at the point of need for everyone on the planet. We're therefore fundraising for NHS Charities Together and hoping to raise £10,000 per year through this podcast. NHS Charities Together currently fund over 4,000 projects to support staff and patients to build a brighter future for the NHS. Find out more from our fundraising page in the show notes. This podcast is free to listen to, but we recommend a one-off donation of the cost of your therapy session or anything you can afford so we can reach our £10,000 target every year to support the NHS. I've donated the price of my therapy session and my company will continue to sponsor this podcast and fundraise for the NHS as long as we're able to. Please rate, like, share and subscribe to this podcast to spread the word. If you would like to sponsor us or feature on the show, please email info@breakingthroughtherapy.com. That's absolutely amazing. It sounds like you were able to differentiate certain desires or appetites or emotions associated with food to really get a better understanding of what does this mean. It's not just one blanket response that you do without thinking, just eat. It's actually that, you know, am I eating for joy? Am I eating for hunger? Am I eating to cope? Am I emotionally eating? Or is this what I want to eat? This is amazing to actually have that kind of rich kind of self-awareness that you're saying. It sounds like Jo kind of planted a different repertoire of like voices in your head. You're not sure what she was saying at the time.
I think some of it was just enabling the triggers that were possibly there to be raised at a more conscious level. And like I said, just occasionally there'd be a turn of phrase or something that would pop into my mind and I'd think, I know that's Jo. Right, what's this about? But never in a way where it felt uncomfortable or boundaries had been stepped. It was always something that was good for me.
Fantastic. Jo, can you remember what those kind of voices or comments or what you might have been saying?
I'm afraid I can't, but in NLP we would be very client-led. So it would actually be, I would be repeating things that Claire had said to me. But I think what's interesting here is that I think what I would always want to be encouraging a client to do would be to be permissive. We're working with, you know, recognizing that there is a self-critical part there, but also that self-critical part, it can relax a bit. It doesn't need to be so dominant, but also thinking about different types of hunger. That's one of the things that I work with, you know, recognizing that there is head hunger, heart hunger, mouth hunger, and then real, you know, when you're absolutely really, really hungry because you haven't eaten for a long time, and how you can work with these and how it's very normal, even for people who are normal eaters in inverted commas, and to overeat at times or to eat emotionally, that we don't need to be following strict regimes and calorie counting. It's about learning to let go of all of that. And once people start to do that, quite often I find that that's when the real shifts occur, and that they're not responding to the argument in their head, which is the self-critical part saying, you shouldn't eat that, and then another part saying, but I really want to. Does that resonate with you, Claire?
Yes, it does. It's an interesting one because in the short term, as you're going through the process and immediately afterwards, like I said, it's a much more conscious thing. And then actually, in a good way, it just slides back down the kind of level of sort of brain activity that it takes up, because I've actually just adopted different ways and relationships with food. And it doesn't need to be a conscious sort of prompt or a thought anymore.
Yes, that's right. I mean, what I'm really aiming to do in therapy is to help clients develop a better relationship with food in their bodies, but also so that it goes much further down the agenda so that they can actually get on with the rest of their lives and enjoy life and have a fulfilling new career, as Claire has done, and enjoy their interests and their passions so that they haven't got these very intrusive voices popping up in their heads all the time. So my aim is to help people find the freedom and confidence to be who they really are.
And that is absolutely amazing. I think that's going to be music to a lot of people's ears who are kind of caught dieting, counting calories, having a little shame and guilt, and really understanding that it's on a deeper level that we need to work. It isn't necessarily the calories or what we're eating. And there's the roots of that. And there's that really deep understanding of ourselves that we need in order to have a better relationship with food overall. So that just sounds absolutely marvellous. Thank you so much for explaining that in a lot more detail. When you talk about somatic therapy, because that's another technical term that you use there, Jo, what does that look like? And then I'd love to hear from Claire about how she experienced that.
Well, it's a recognition that we store emotions in our bodies, we feel emotions in our body. It's about the mind-body connection. And also that we store memories in our bodies. So actually recognizing, you know, say a different type of hunger, where would that come up in your body? That's a very simple technique that could be used. Because, as I was saying, there can be different types of hunger, and where are you experiencing that, and what's coming up for you in that moment. But also learning how to maybe use I don't like the word exercise, but activity to release emotions. Things people can find things like going for massages or doing yoga or Tai Chi or even just walking incredibly soothing, and it can help release pent up emotions and stress. So learning how to do that in everyday life and learning how to breathe in certain situations. Sometimes I teach clients, and I can't remember whether I used this with you, Claire, but I also teach clients EFT, the tapping.
I don't think we did a great deal of it, actually, but I know it's something that we did talk about.
Let's just take us back to, so EFT, is that emotion-focused therapy?
It's emotional freedom technique.
Ah.
You're actually tapping on acupuncture points.
So before we go into that, just to take us back to the somatic therapy, this is all fascinating. I did say in my intro to this podcast that if I ever had an aha moment and learned something, I would say, just because I'm a doctor of psychology doesn't mean I know absolutely everything. No one does. But it's been really interesting to hear about that EFT. But in terms of the somatic, I'm actually really intrigued to hear from your experience, Claire, where else you would feel hunger in your body and how that was linked to different emotional states. Because obviously most of us associate food with our stomach then.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I necessarily would feel hunger as much in other parts of my body. I would feel the emotions. So I would feel literally a lump in the throat. People talk about it. That's an emotion that I was trying to suppress, maybe sadness or anger. It would feel like a barrier in my throat. It would feel like a heaviness in my chest. I think things that people talk about in general became much more pronounced to me during this time. So becoming aware of a sense of discomfort in the body and realizing that that was telling me there's an emotion there that I need to engage with. And that is the right way to deal with this, not to go and eat something. That was the thing. There were definitely some techniques that we worked on together. So things like maybe making good use of breath work. If I really felt like I was getting into a state where I was feeling very uncomfortable, perhaps my adrenaline was starting to flow, something where I might feel quite threatened, then actually using breath work to just physically calm the body, to take the chemicals and knock them back a bit, actually was quite helpful. And then I think this connection with exercise that we were talking about is very interesting. I spent, I think, best part of the last 15 years going to the gym, and it's been a huge change for me and a hugely positive thing. But one thing I hadn't even connected until this conversation is that actually there was a period where I went to the gym very, very intensively and also did a lot of different workouts to what I do now. And that was actually shortly after doing work with Joe. So I started doing boxing and also powerlifting. And actually, I would go to the gym and I'd come out and say, God, I feel so much better. I have left my anger there. I realised until now that actually that was really part of me processing this. I'm not an angry woman these days. I still go to the gym and I just lift normal amounts of weight. But I had a period of several years where I would box 2 to 3 times a week and do powerlifting. And I needed it to help me shift whatever it was that was going on me, out of the body in a better way.
And that's amazing, isn't it? That metaphor, it's so powerful. I leave my anger at the gym. You don't take it with you. You're not angry anymore in your daily life. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Jo, did you have a comment you wanted to make before I ask you a bit about the EFT?
Well, I was just going to say that I think one of the things that Claire and I realised, because she was experiencing a lot of different physical symptoms, and it was very hard to pinpoint what was causing these because you had quite a lot of complex medical things going on, including life stage. So it was difficult to know quite what was going on there. But I think what we both noticed, that your physical symptoms such as the headaches and other aches and pains and symptoms started to reduce as you were able to let go of your emotions and voice them and express them. So I think that was really a useful part of therapy. And that's what we mean by meaning of somatic therapy, is that it is this mind-body connection. If somebody is having persistent headaches and we can't find necessarily a medical reason, that it could be a stored emotion there. So I love that way you've talked about going to the gym and boxing, and I think that's so helpful. Yes.
Don't have any headaches these days, Jo.
That's brilliant. That's great to hear.
Yep.
It really is. It's amazing because it's understanding the mind-body link. And we feel things very physically. You've just highlighted how you can feel trauma and memories as a sort of pain or an ache or a lump. It's possible. There's such a strong connection there between the mind and the body. So did you touch on EFT there, or did you want to talk us through that a little bit more, Jo?
Well, EFT, it's sort of known colloquially as tapping. And what one does is you learn routines, tapping routines, and you're tapping on acupuncture points throughout your body and actually saying something to yourself as you tap. And it's a great way to bring down heightened emotion or anxiety. And it is working both physically and on your unconscious mind. So it's best done with a therapist. And what you do is you actually rate what you're feeling at the beginning of the tapping session, and then you work through it, and then you rate it again, and you work again and again to bring down the difficult emotion that you're experiencing. It works best in the context of therapy. It's a useful tool. I find it's very useful for maybe people who find talking about their feelings more difficult, and people who are physically fidgety, maybe, who are physically active.
So that's been absolutely amazing. Really interesting to hear those different techniques. If you don't mind, I wanted to take us back to kind of two important phases in your story. You were talking about the complications that you had from surgery, and I think that'd be really key to discuss to help other people who may have been through something similar. And then also the amazing career you then found as a result of your kind of journey and what that entails. That'd be really helpful.
Sure. Okay. When I went for all the discussions with the surgeon before the surgery, they raised with you very responsibly, absolutely as they should, that no surgery is without risk and that these are the percentages and you signed the right waivers. And not for one moment did I imagine it would be me. And, it just was the case. I was that 1% that had very serious post-operative complications. So in my case, I developed an infection inside my stomach and my stomach burst open a week after surgery. It was excruciatingly painful and I had to go immediately to hospital. They were able to ascertain that my stomach acid was leaking into my body cavity very quickly, and they rushed me into theatre and they saved my life. But it did mean that they had to patch up my stomach in something of a hurry. And I came to intensive care, which in itself is pretty sobering. You realise something's gone fairly hideously wrong. Although I found my sense of humour quite quickly. They'd had an accident in the surgery and dropped blue dial over me. And I asked for a mirror and I realised I looked like a Smurf. And when I said I looked like a Smurf, they all took a sigh of relief and said, she's going to be okay. If she's worried about her appearance, this one's going to pull through. But yes, I had 6 weeks in hospital being fed by a tube and then afterwards having a stomach that was stitched together in a hurry. And the 6 weeks in hospital was incredibly difficult because I think I'd spent my time up until then being very successful in my career, being very busy, using lots of things to distract myself. I used to move jobs quite frequently, move house quite frequently. And 6 weeks in hospital, whilst I had visitors, I was in a room on my own for many, many hours a day. And there was no way I could stop myself from taking stock and, to be blunt, not liking what I saw. I realised I'd chased money and status and all the wrong things, and that actually the bits that I really wanted, love and a family, really needed to make quite significant change. So whilst in one hand, it was a horrible shock and not something I would wish on people, and I'd like to say it's very rare when you have bariatric surgery, so mine is not a common experience. It probably gave me the opportunity to change my life because I had 6 weeks where I couldn't run.
And what year was that you had the surgery? 15 years ago?
Yeah. And then I suppose in terms of my career choices, for a long, long time, I'd known that I'd wanted to be a chef, but I'd had a very successful career in the corporate world and I'd done all the things that you're supposed to do, go up the ladder, earn more money. Everyone tells you you're doing great, but you just work harder and harder and it becomes less and less fulfilling. So again, when COVID came, it was a real opportunity for me to change. And so in addition to working with Jo, I also started studying for chef qualifications online at the same time. And then I got a job working as a commis chef in a fabulous deli that specialised in healthy food. And then a couple of years ago, I went to culinary school and enrolled myself in the whole crazy world. It is just fabulous, a very intensive culinary education. Work as a private chef, as a cookery teacher, and I did quite a lot of work with clients that have complex diets, some driven by emotional reasons, some driven by practical reasons. And I really enjoy being able to use some of my experience and my knowledge to help people and probably to empathise at quite a deeper level with those for whom just eat what's on your plate isn't an option.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, that takes so much resilience to have a near-death experience in surgery, to be able to see the funny side of being covered in dye, and then to reevaluate what you really thought was precious in life and to turn your life around and to give that back to other people. And I've heard, I'm not sure what a commie chef is, if you could tell me what commie means.
It's only one step up from a pot wash, and I was a part-time pot wash and a part-time commie chef. Start in a kitchen to learn your job and your skill properly from the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Oh, fantastic. And now you're doing private dining and specialist food. You've explained that you've made some really simple meals taste incredible for people who've got specialised kind of feeding requirements. Is that right?
Yeah, so it can be as simple as things like people who have allergens that aren't maybe easily understood, but it also can be to do with textures. So I eat predominantly a soft food diet because it's hard for me to digest a lot of meat and fish and proteins. And so I've done some work with people who are older who need a soft diet, maybe because of dentition needs, their teeth aren't as strong. And actually, it's very hard if you blend food to make it exciting. It's uniform in colour, it's uniform in smell. You know, you don't really want to eat a bowl of something that is identical. So then understanding how you can change that and maybe put interesting garnishes with it, add extra flavour notes, really bring it to life so that it's a plate of food that everybody wants to eat, that maybe people don't realise it's been designed for someone with a special eating requirement because everyone is sitting down and enjoying the same meal. That's quite challenging, but I really love doing that.
That's absolutely incredible. And Jo, I know that when we met before, we were talking about how it isn't always advised that your clients go into the food business. It could be a high-risk situation. I think that's what we were saying, but correct me if I'm wrong. How do you feel hearing this now? It's incredible, like post-traumatic growth and turning it into the most amazing career that's helping so many people.
Well, I think in Claire's case, I think it was exactly the right thing for her to do. But I remember at the time when we were working together, Claire was doing a cookery course. And I felt that maybe at times being exposed to cooking some foods, cooking, sweet foods, cakes and things like that, I felt that it was maybe triggering for her at that point in time. It was maybe a bit too much, but she's proved me completely wrong and she's gone ahead and she's done this. It's quite interesting, but there was a study done many years ago that was actually carried out, I think, in a prison a long time ago. And it was with male prisoners and they were put on a diet, a restrictive diet. And then afterwards, they were observed for years afterwards. And a lot of them ended up working in the food industry, or they chose careers with food because of the feeling of deprivation and wanting to be, wanting to have that connection with food. And within my own profession, within nutritional therapy, we do see quite a lot of nutritional therapists who have had past issues with food as well. So it's quite interesting that we've chosen this. So, but I think Claire is just amazing because I would say your work is not just about cooking wonderful food, but you are working therapeutically, with the people you are helping. You will have that depth of understanding and empathy. And I'm sure that is really helping as well.
I think so. And I think also as well, genuinely what I do is an absolute pleasure. So when I make a meal for someone that doesn't find it easy to eat, and it's one of the best things they've eaten for a while, that is a moment for me that I treasure as well. because, in a way that sometimes healthy and sometimes unhealthy, food and love do overlap at so many points in life. But so when I make a meal for someone that is the very best that you can do, and then sharing it with them and seeing their pleasure, it is a privilege. It really is.
Absolutely. That is such a wonderful note to end on. I'm just really curious about one more thing. I think you both work with people who are neurodiverse, and I think that is really, really important to capture, because I know that you're seeing more of a pattern, I believe, of people who maybe on the spectrum having special dietary requirements or needs. Can you just briefly talk to us a bit about that? And then, unfortunately, we'll have to finish, I think, for today. Could talk to you for hours.
Well, some people who are neurodiverse, they have sensory issues with food. So they prefer certain textures, certain smells, certain colours. They might have a limited food palate. They might not want to eat certain foods. They might want to eat the same things every day and the same brands of food. There is something called ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And so I am trained to recognise that and help people with, both nutritionally and psychologically, how to deal with this. And I would say that Claire would be in an ideal position to help people actually learn how to prepare their food, or for their families to learn how to prepare their food.
Yeah. So I would say it's an area where I think the important thing is to understand the individual. You can't treat everybody the same way. And definitely something where working with the family is important as well. Some of the things that I've done, for example, are playing with textures. So maybe there is a curry and someone does not want to eat a curry as a solid item. Actually, you can blend that into a soup, potentially with some extra coconut milk or something. And actually, you might find that that's something someone else is very happy to eat then as a result. And again, going in the other direction, making use of gelatin and gels and gums and things as well. You can take food that is liquid and then make them something that is biteable if that's something that somebody wants to do. So, for example, if you take some orange juice that's naturally sweet and add a gelling agent to it, it doesn't actually taste sweet in the mouth. So you have to learn to add sugar in that instance, or in other instances, just to season differently to allow for that. One thing I think is really helpful is understanding which foods are transitional. The best way of describing it is things that change state in your mouth. A whatsit enters your mouth as a solid and it becomes a liquid. And so does a jelly and chocolate. Using transitional foods can be a way to bridge states that people find very uncomfortable initially. So if you don't like food that is crunchy, find something maybe like a whatsit, which doesn't really have a lot of crunch, but is setting you up for the future journey for where you want to go in the future. So definitely having an understanding of different textures and how to transition between them is something that I use in my day-to-day life.
That is absolutely fascinating. And what I would love from you both, you've mentioned some research papers, you've mentioned some visualizations and breathwork techniques, all sorts of things. Claire, you've mentioned some absolutely fantastic ideas. If you've got resources on those, then we can put them in the show notes for people to read. I think that would be absolutely brilliant. So do send me over some links. So before we go, I'm sad to end our conversation because it's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. I'm really hoping we'll be raising money through these podcasts for NHS charities together. So thank you both for being here. Jo, if people wanted to find you to start therapy with you, nutritional therapy or psychotherapy or a combination of both, how would they get hold of you?
Well, I've got a website called joannaoates.com. Also, they could email me on hello@joannaoates.com.
That's brilliant. Okay, great. Well, we're going to end our conversation for today, but thank you again so much for being part of this journey with Breaking Through Therapy, and do keep in touch.
Thank you.
This podcast is not a replacement for professional, psychological or psychiatric help. You can book an appointment with our team on info@lifespanpsychology.co.uk, but we do not provide a crisis service. If you've been affected by any of the content and need to speak to somebody urgently, please contact your GP to make a referral for talking therapies. You can contact NHS 111 out of hours or the Samaritans on 116 123. Childline also offer a free, confidential helpline for children and young people in distress and offers support from counsellors online. Call 0800 1111 or go to www.childline.org.uk. If you're worried about someone's safety, please call 999 and bring them to the Accident and Emergency Service. You can contact the charity CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, or an SPCC for Children. These resources are in the show notes. Thank you for being part of the Breaking Through Therapy community. I would also like to thank the composer of this theme tune. It's called Bliss by Luke Bergs. Let's dive into more conversations that change the courses of people's lives in upcoming episodes.